Listen, we're still here sa methodology. The third part for our methodology is called the sampling technique. Again, the sampling technique. So in this section, you will be identifying the technique that you will use in selecting the respondents of your study. So in research, we don't really use the whole population. Like if you want to study the residents of General Santos City, if we have 1 million residents, we don't really include everyone as respondents of our study. So we do sampling, we just get representatives from the population. But you also have to, aside from identifying the technique that we are going to use in selecting the respondents, we also have to mention here the identity and characteristics of our respondents. If ever we have inclusion or exclusion criteria in selecting them, we will include the descriptions here under the sampling technique. So I have mentioned the term population and also sample. When you say population kasi, it's the universe of our study and it consists all the elements that we are giving consideration. And the population also is called the parameters kasi yun yung kalahatan na silang lahat doon merong certain characteristic na gusto natin i-investigate. So examples of population, like when your research is about first-year pharmacy students in our school, then that will be our population. The criteria will be they are enrolled as first-year student in GSD MSFI. So that is the parameter. And everyone that again is enrolled as first-year pharmacy students sa doctors will be included as a member of the population. So aside from that, we have all RadTech faculty in GSD MSFI. That is our parameter. And some of you might have residents of General Santos City or just a portion of the residents, like for example, senior citizens only, or the millennials or the adults working in General Santos City. That's what we call the population. So again, we are setting the parameters when we say population. So under here, we have here an example of the population, like this one. The respondents of the study were member of the Senior Citizens Association of Cabanatuan City. That's the respondents. That will be the population. But we have additional criteria here. And if you have this also in your study, you really have to state that. Here's, you can call this sampling technique though. The title will be sampling technique. So ano yung ibang criteria aside from they are members of the Senior Citizens Association? We have here the respondents who account for 60% of the SSS retirees only were selected through purposive sampling. Though naka-past tense ito ha kasi this one is already done. Tapos na ito na study. Pero sa inyo, let me remind you that everything will be in the future tense. I mean sa verbs. Sa verbs ninyo, dapat naka-future tense pa yan sila lahat. From the introduction to your methodology, because you are yet to conduct your study. So, paano sinulat yung sampling technique? Una, in-identify yung population. And then second, we have another criteria and the sampling technique mismo. So the sampling technique being used here is purposive sampling. So we have here other criteria pa, like only the respondents who could read and write and who could still attend meetings of the association were counted as samples. Hence, out of 150 samples, 90 were made respondents. So you have to narrow down the selection of your respondent kasi. Again, we don't do population testing. Instead, we do sampling. Okay, so we have kinds of population, the finite and the infinite. The finite population are those that cannot be counted. So baliktad. The finite can be counted. So like example, when you want to study the residents of General Santos City, remember that we have the census and that our Philippine Statistic Authority has the number for that. So that will be included for the finite population. Or for example, you just want to study the fourth-year medical technology students in GSDMSFI, we can count that. We can even obtain the number from the registrar. However, if you have a population that cannot be counted, we call it infinite population. So for example, stars in the sky, we cannot really count that. And at the same time, number of pedestrians that will cross the street. Alangan mag-atang ka dito tibok adlaw and bilangon gyud nimo kung pila ka buok ang nag-cross ana nga street. And please remember na in that case, iba-iba yung numbers na nagko-cross ng street in a day. So you have to identify, look at your paper. If your study involves a human subject, then if you can count it, then we call it finite population. But however, I told you we don't do population testing. Instead, we do sampling. So do not forget, when you say sample, that's a representative of the population. We will be taking them from the population, a small group only, and that these people have the characteristics na sinet natin from for the population. So kung first year pharmacy students or medtech students, dapat syempre first year lang talaga sila lahat kasi yun yung characteristics na sinet natin for our population. So we have here the reasons why we do not do population testing. Number one, it will be very expensive for us to reach out everyone na member of our population. So kung isa ka milyon na siya, pura gasto kayo nga, abuton yun nato sila tanan, i-reach out nato sila, and we will be interviewing them, or we will be giving them questionnaires for them to answer. And then at the same time, aside from the cost, the time also. So we will have problem with the time here, as we are time bounded sa research. We will just be given January to March for the data gathering. So that is why we only take a small group from our population. However, since the sample is a representative from the population, actually samples can be used to do some inferences, generalizations, or conclusions about our target population. Now, please take note here the steps in sampling. Number one, syempre, you have to identify the population. So if you're going to do an experimental study, your population there is, for example, animal, or if that is human blood, then please identify sino yung mga tao na kukunan nyo ng blood. Meron bang certain criteria para sa kanila? You don't have to name them, ha? You just have to describe the population, the characteristics of the population that you're going to select to extract the blood for your testing. Okay, and then determination of the required sample size. For those who will be doing descriptive research, you really have to compute for the sample size. Sa experimental later, I will also teach you what are you going to do. We don't compute for the sample size anymore for the experimental na study. And lastly, selection of the sample. So this one is what you call the Sloven's formula. Again, we call this the Sloven's formula, and we use this in the computation of our sample size. Let me just get my pen so that I can write on the screen. Ayan. This is n equals capital letter N over 1 plus capital letter N times E squared. By the way, this is squared, ha? Okay, so small letter n there will be the sample size. The capital letter N will be the population size. And the E is the margin of error in which our minimum is 0.05. Actually, the error class is we really allot this one. We allow a room for error that is for non-precision since we are using the sample and not the population. So nag-e-expect talaga tayo ng error from our experiment. So bibigyan natin siya ng margin of error at 5%. Now, how do we do this? Example, you want to study the medtech department. And for example, this is just an example, gusto mong population is dapat lahat ng medtech sa doctors. But since we don't do population testing, then we will compute for the sample. Now, example na amoy 540 students all in all sa medtech na program. So magko-compute ka niyan, N is equal to, this capital letter N is this one, the population size. So this is 540 divided by 1 plus this one is still capital letter N. So this is again 540 times our room for error. This is 0.05. That is 5%. And then square natin siya. So this is 540 divided by 1 plus 540 times 0.05 squared is 0.0025. Let's continue here. 540 divided by 0.0025 times 540 is 1.35. Ayan. Step by step, Jude. This is 2.35. And our sample size here is, wait lang, 200. The answer is actually 229.79. But remember, you cannot, class, again, you cannot do a survey or an interview with a 0.79 na tao. So, dapat pag nagko-compute tayo ng Snells formula, the final answer should always be rounded off to the nearest whole number. So your sample size here will be 230. Again, we call this the Snells formula. We use this in computing the sample size. So if you want to conduct a study for the medtech program, the population will be all the medtech students from first year to fourth year. You will only have to do your survey to 230 students, not really sa whole population, but sa sample lang, 230. We will be selecting 230 students out from the 540 na population size. This is again how you compute for the sample size. However, I think last time, pinakita ko sa inyo si Rawsoft. Wait lang, let me open it. So this is what I do. If you don't, you actually have an option. Depende sa inyo whether you're going to use the Snells formula or you will just use the Rawsoft calculator. So i-search nyo lang sa Google Rawsoft calculator, lalabas na yan siya agad. So this one sample size calculator by Rawsoft. This is a free software. So I told you last time, ano lang ito, sa margin of error, just like with our Snells formula, we allot 5%. That is ginagamit talaga na common choice. So therefore, our confidence level is 95. We are confident na 95% of our data will be correct and that we are allowing 5% for error, room for error. And this is now where we place our population size. Hindi na natin papakialaman si response distribution. That's just 50% na automatic for this software. Population size na lang talaga yung papalitan natin. So, kung titingnan natin, ano nga yung sinulat ko kanina, 540. So, ayan, ilalagay ko siya dyan, 540, and then magre-recommend siya ng sample size. So, in this case, the recommendation of Rausoft is just 225. So actually, almost the same sila ni Slowin's formula. Kung may difference man, it's just a very slight difference. Like for Slowin's, that's 230. For Rausoft, that is 225. Again, I am giving you the choice. If you are going to do a descriptive research, it's up to you if you are going to use the Slowin's formula or the Rausoft. But in your sampling technique, under the sampling technique, after describing your population, you have to identify, you have to state what formula have you used in computing the sample size. If you use the Slovin's formula, lagay nyo doon that the sample size is computed using the Slovin's formula. Or kung gumamit kayo ng Rausoft, ilagay nyo rin doon sa sampling technique that you use the Rausoft software in the determination of the sample size. Okay? Questions so far about the determination of the sample size, class? May gusto ba kayong itanong? Wait lang. Let me open my email first. And let's see anong ginawa nila sa paper nila katulad ng ito. Ano yung gusto ipangutan? Itang task card.
Ma'am, sa respondents, good ma'am.
Come
Okay lang ma'am na, wala good siya na set like 18 to 76, ganyan good ma'am. Okay lang i-state na 18 and above.
18, okay lang. 18 and above. Oo, okay ra. Sige. So, ganito yung ginawa nila. Actually, this time, hiniwalay nila ang respondents of the study and the sampling technique. Though, kailangan pa ni i-edit ilahang papel, this should be called sampling technique, not sampling procedure. So the first thing, after, by the way, sa research local, we have here the respondents of the study. So you have to clearly identify who will be your respondents. If there are certain characteristics or inclusion criteria that you would like to set, please include that under the respondents of the study. And then after that will be the sampling technique. So we will be placing here the number of the sample, and at the same time later i-discuss ko sa inyo yung different types of sampling technique. Though I believe na-discuss na siya sa inyong statistics. You had your statistics last time, di ba? Pero ulitin natin siya discuss para ma-refresh kayo ano ba yung sampling technique na tinatawag. So in this case, our respondents of the study, they have the millennials, and when you say millennials, that's born between 1981 to 1996. And syempre, currently residing sa Jensen, mga millennials sa Jensen kasi yung respondents nila. And for the sampling technique, the respondents were chosen through a combination of quota and purposive sampling. I'll discuss that later. However, they have also included the inclusion criteria, other inclusion and exclusion criteria, and then take note of this. Tingnan nyo yung kanilang respondents. This one was being computed. So we have a total of 520 respondents here. So mauna ilahang gi-reach out sa tanang millennials nga nakuha nila. No need to actually state the population size ha. Dili na ninyo ibutang diri nga na isa ka million nga millennials. No, diretso ka na mag-state sa sample size mo. Okay? So kaya lang itong 520 nila, i-divide nila 20 respondents each sa 26 domiciles in General Santos City. Ang ginawa kasi nila dito, nagkuha lang sila ng 20 millennials since 520 all in all. Quota kasi ang sampling nila. So kung nakita ninyo, walang nakalagay na, hindi pala sila nag-compute, walang nakalagay na Snells Formula or walang nakalagay na Rao-Soft. Kasi nag-quota sila. Sila ang nag-set ng kanilang respondents. So ang nilagay nila 20 millennials kada barangay in Gensan. So that will be a total of 520 respondents. So ito yung example ng pagkasulat ng ating respondents of the study and the sampling technique. So let's discuss now the sampling techniques. We have the rule of the thumb method wherein 20% percentage half from the population frame for a sample is actually okay. Pwede mo na siyang gamitin as sample 20%. So kung naakay 100 na population, you will just have to do the investigation to 20 people. Pwede na siya, accepted siya. Pero ang problem natin with just using the rule of thumb method is this has no statement of validity. So hindi natin alam if valid ba talaga, hindi natin ma-assure na valid talaga yung nakuha natin na result from them. Kasi nga konti lang. Pero accepted, pero hindi natin matatawag na talagang valid yung result. Now for descriptive, normative, and survey research, we also have the so-called central limit theorem, wherein in here we believe that the greater the sample size, the nearer the result approaches the parametric values. So, ito talaga din ang ginagamit natin for statistics. The more na daghan ato ang sample, it means we can get a valid result, and if we are going to do statistical test, we can use the parametric testing. So, I don't know kung nag-lesson mo sa inyong statistics, the parametric and the non-parametric. Pero siguro sa second sem, since we still have research 2, and I don't know if I'll still be your teacher by that time. Pero kung ako inyong teacher, I'll also include lesson about statistics para alam nyo din kung ano yung gagamitin nyo na statistical tool in analyzing your result. So if population size class is not large, 50% and above can be considered. So example, 200 lang naman yung population size ng inyong study, then 50% of that or more, 100 katao or pataas, will be accepted na. And that will also be considered as a valid result. Or less than 50% but more than 30%, we can use the so-called parametric testing or parametric statistics, pero we cannot really do generalization for the whole population. Kasi nga, konti yung ating respondents, hindi talaga siya magiging so-called representative, so we cannot generalize the result. Example, sabi ng result mo, mataas yung knowledge ng mga samples mo, pero konti lang pala sila. So the interpretation will just be limited to the samples only. That 35%, sa 35% na sample mo, mataas talaga yung knowledge nila. Pero hindi natin pwedeng i-generalize na the whole population, mataas ang knowledge nila over your variable. So ganun yung magiging data interpretation natin. And if, for example, your sample size is less than 30% and that you have utilized purposive sampling, the interpretation of the data will still be limited to the sample only. And that parametric testing will not be considered here. Instead, non-parametric testing ang gagawin. So we will have na lang the parametric and the non-parametric testing on the research 2. Ang kailangan nating tandaan, pag nagko-compute tayo ng ating sample size, mas maigi kung 50% and above hindi siya bababa sa 50% so that we can do generalization, we can have our conclusion for the population talaga. Dili ta malimit sa sample only. And at the same time, we can use the parametric testing. Though non-parametric testing in statistics is still accepted, pero when it comes to the validity, we prefer the parametric statistics. Okay, now we have two kind of samples. So this is now where the sampling technique is being identified. So please listen kasi you really have to state the sampling technique sa paper ninyo. And this one is the favorite, one of the favorite questions of the panelists. Kung anong sampling technique ang gagamitin ninyo in selecting the sample. Kung kukuha na kayo ng sample from the population. So we have here probability sample wherein you will be giving equal chance to all members of the population to be selected in your study. Again, probability sample means it's a sample wherein you have given all members of the population equal chance to be selected or chosen na ma-include in your study. Therefore, probability samples are actually random samples and they are considered as the best representative for our population. We will be selecting randomly. So example, we have 500 people, that's our population size. And then when we computed for the sample size, we got 250, exact 50%. Then we will be randomly choosing 250 people from the 500 population size, random. So again, we will be giving them equal chance. If we do this, again, if we do probability sampling, then our findings will be valid and we can also use the findings of our study to infer, to make an inference or to make a generalization for the characteristics of the population. However, if you are not giving equal chance for all members of the population to be selected in your study, we call it non-probability sample. So hindi mo siya randomly giselect. Ikaw lang nagbuot-buot kaning mga una na kong makita pag abot ninyo sa eskwelahan ang pinakaunang musulod sa gate, mauna siya ang akong sample number 1. That is not actually giving them equal chance to be selected in the study. Ikaw lang nagbuot-buot din nga. Kung siya una mo sulod, di siya dili na siya random selection. So ma-under na siya sa non-probability sampling. And non-probability sample are not really considered representative of our population and thus we cannot use it to make inferences and generalizations for our population. So isa-isahin natin class ang different techniques under the two. Let's start with the probability sampling technique. Again, let's start with the probability sampling technique. We have here the first one, the simple random sampling, which is best known when we want to do probability sampling and the most common. So we have two basic principles when we do simple random sampling. We have here equiprobability. That's the probability of giving them equal chance to be selected. Okay, how about experimental? Later, I will also discuss what are you going to write in the sampling technique of the experimental studies. And then there will be independent. So this refers to the condition that one member is independent and that the selection of this member will not affect also the selection of the other members. So iba-iba sila. Hindi sila even yung result na makuha mo sa isa will not affect the others. That's simple random sampling technique. And how do we do the simple random sampling? We can use the lottery method or the table of random numbers. You know lottery method, right? Example, you will be writing 500 kabok. You will be writing all the names of the population in a paper, place it in a bowl, like fishbowl method. Pwede po natin siya tawagan ng fishbowl method. And then we will have the draw lots. That will be giving equal chance for all members of the population to be selected in your study. And we call that simple random sampling. Or you will have table of random numbers. Meron kang table, randomly nakasulat yung mga numbers dyan. Numbers lang ang makikita mo, but actually you will have a control here na yung mga numbers are just representing the names of the members of the population. And that magdodraw ka rin ng mga numbers mo. Marakag nagbingguan eh. Mag-draw ka rin ng numbers or example na select mo ang number 2. So kung kanino yung pangalan na nakalagay sa number 2, yun yung magiging unang sample mo and so on. So that is the simple random sampling. Pwede nyo itong gawin when you want na talagang probability sample yung makuha mo. Wait lang, I'll show you a video. I still have that. Explain natin yon. Kung naisipan nyo mag-stratified random sampling, ano nga yung steps? Example, you have here the population. After identifying the population, you will be dividing them into groups. Okay? Homogeneous groups. We call that strata kung marami or stratum kung isa lang. So example, you have decided na that you will divide the population based on age or sa sex. Kung sa example sa kanina sa video, sex ang ginamit na groupings, or kung meron pa kayong maisip dyan, na other groupings na homogeneous, homogeneous siya dapat, meaning parehas sila ng characteristics sa kagaya ng sex, lahat sila dito babae and then lahat sila dito lalaki. So ganun yung pag-divide mo sa population. After dividing the population into different strata, you will be computing for the population size. Okay? Magko-compute ka ngayon ng population size, you can use the Rausoft software or you can use the Snells Formula, pero isa-isahin mo siya. Kung meron kang 100 na babae dito and 100 na lalaki, i-compute mo yung sample size. Ilang babae ang kailangan mong kunin and ilang lalaki din dito sa second group. Kung na-identify mo na yon, then mauuwi tayo class pa rin sa random sampling. So pag compute mo, for example, 10 na babae and then 10 din na lalaki, so you will just have to do random sampling to get 10 from this group and then another 10 from this group. That's just the difference though between random sampling and stratified sampling. There is this process in between wherein you will divide the population into strata. Any question about the stratified sampling? La. Okay. And then, ganito, baka malito kayo between stratified sampling and cluster sampling kasi parehas tayong nag-group ng ating population. Itong sa stratified sampling kanina, population, and then we will have the strata. But take note that the strata is homogeneous, meaning they have the same certain characteristic. Kung sex, female, female sila lahat. Kung male, male din silang lahat. Isang group sila. Or kung we divide them using age, kung gusto natin 10 years old sila lahat, 10 years old lang isang grupo and then another group for another age range, or kung isang ano lang talaga like 11 years old, ganon. Pero sa cluster sampling, ganito, population ka pa rin magsa-start, pero most of the time, cluster sampling is used when there is geographical geographical na consideration na kailangan nating gagawin. So example sa tibuok General Santos City, lisod kaayo no, abuton silang tanan. Example 500 sila kabuok, unya layo-layo na layo sila tanan, napay nasa San Jose, napay nauban sa Tinagakan, sa Katanggawan. Layo kaayo sila. So that's the time we do the cluster sampling. So this one is still grouping together our population, pero this time we call them cluster. Now, the members in each cluster will still have the characteristic na desired natin, yung sa inclusion and exclusion criteria, pero hindi talaga totally homogeneous, hindi kagaya sa stratified kanina na pag babae, babae lang lahat, pag lalaki, lalaki lang din lahat. Sa cluster, pwede sila sagol-sagol as long as they still are member of the population. And that, kung titingnan natin yung example kanina, ang division is based on school. Kung example, grade 6 students yung target natin na population. So, meron tayong school A, school B, school E, and F. And then, we will be randomly selecting. Meron pa rin dito, randomly selecting the cluster. Pwede mo pa rin itong i-compute class kung ilang cluster yung pipiliin mo. For example, nakabuo ka ng 20 clusters from the population. Pwede ka din dito mag-Snells Formula or mag-Rowsoft or any software you can use to compute the sample size, pero sa cluster muna. So for example, after mo nag-compute na sa Snells Formula, using this 20 here, ang result will be 11. So kung 11 yan siya, you will just select randomly 11 clusters galing dito. Pag na-select mo na yung 11 na yan, so meron ka na dyan 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, i-compute mo pa isa-isa dito kung ilan dapat ang iyong sample size for each clusters. So example, merong 100 katao dito, i-compute mo what will be the sample size here. If dito 50 lang, mag-compute ka na naman ng iyong sample size for this cluster. Ayan, and that is also true for the other clusters. So that's how we do the cluster sampling. So actually, mas madali siya. Example dito, residents of General Santos City, we can actually do cluster sampling and the clusters will be based sa barangay. So pila ka bukang barangay sa Gensan? 26 siguro. So out sa 26, pipili tayo randomly ng clusters na isasalin natin. Example lang, tatlo ka clusters ang na-compute nato from the Snells Formula. So mag-ano ka ngayon, example fishbowl method, tapos sa tatlo ang pagbunot nimo, you have chosen the San Isidro, the Kalumpang, and the Lagaw. So dito naka-class karon mag-compute kung unsa pila ka buok imuhang sample sa Lagaw based sa population nila dito sa Lagaw ha. And then sa Kalumpang pod o sa San Isidro. And then mao na to ang kalahatan sa imuhang samples for your study. So sila lang imuhang hatagan sa imuhang questionnaire if you have your questionnaire. So I hope nasabtan si cluster sampling. Any question? Any questions so far for our cluster sampling? Wala na? Sige. So the last one will be the so-called systematic sampling with random start. Let us also look at the video para ma-picture out niyo siya. Okay. Again, that's systematic sampling with random start. You will still assign numbers for the members sa imong population. And then you will still compute for the sampling size. Pero you will have to compute additionally the sampling interval. So ano nga yung ating formula for the sampling interval? I equals to N divided by N. The capital letter N is the population size. And then the small letter n is the sample size. So ito yung I is the sampling interval. Okay? And then do not forget that we will have a random start. So kagaya ng example kanina, merong 1 to 30 na population. The desired, ang na-compute na sample size using the Snells formula or the Rouse-of is 5. So i-compute natin yan siya. Example 30 divided by 5, the interval is 6. So kung you choose na magsa-start ka sa 1, random ha, random. Ikaw yung pipili saan ka magsa-start, mag-choose ng iyong what you call that, sample, or yung talagang isa-select to be included in your study. So you have 1 here, mag-add ka lang ng sampling interval na na-compute mo. So the 7th person will be the next person na ma-choose. And then constantly mag-add ka lang ng 6 hanggang maabot mo itong 5 person na ito. So this is still considered as a probability sampling because we have here again that the selection of the interval and at the same time random tayo nag-start. So actually pwede po ka mag-start sa 5. If you want to start with the 5th person, then mag-add ka sa sampling interval mo, example 6. So this is the first one. So 5 plus 6 is 11. So the person na na-assign doon sa number 11 will be your second sample and so on na yan. So on na yan siya, class. That's what we do with the systematic sampling with random start. So ito sila lahat ang tinatawag natin na probability sampling techniques. Okay? Questions? Wala? So next meeting, we will be discussing the non-probability sampling techniques. Medyo marami-rami pa rin ito sila. And then after that, we will be discussing the different research instruments. So ayan, mga questionnaires, interview guide, and then yung observation method, especially for experimental research. And I'll be also discussing next meeting the general criteria for the research tool. So this one is for the validation, especially if you have assessed in your research na you will be making your own questionnaire. Kayo mismo ang gagawa ng questionnaire ninyo. Wala kasi kayong makita na pwedeng i-adapt. So kailangan nating mag-test for validity and even reliability. So I will also discuss this next meeting. So please study sa na-discuss ko ngayon. I might give or I might not give a quiz next meeting. Okay?